I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. At a Senate Rules Committee hearing on Wednesday, Senator Roy Blunt discussed the need to reform the Electoral Count Act. The Electoral Count Act was an 1887 law used by former President Trump's legal team to keep him in power after the 2020 election. The Missouri Republican said that the legislation, quote, is really outdated and vague in so many ways. Senator Blunt also spoke about how members of both parties want to update the legislation.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Klobuchar, and we have worked together on these issues for a long time, and hopefully as an example of the importance of coming together and making things happen. I'm glad to get a chance to talk while Senator Manchin and Senator Collins, both good friends of mine, are here, and talk about some of the reasons for the hearing today. As you pointed out, the Electoral Count Act of 1887 just turned out to be more troublesome potentially than anybody had thought. What happened in 1876 was that tightly contested race you talked about between Tilden and Hayes, and 4 states, Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Oregon, all had 2 different groups meet on December the 6th of 1876, and each of those groups sent in a competing set of electoral count. And there was no way really to deal with that issue at that point in our history. The Congress passed the Electoral Commission Act, which really didn't work very well either, and was and ended with a compromise that put Hayes in the White House and largely ended Reconstruction in the South at the same time after really a decade of fairly great progress was eliminated as part of the result of that compromise, one of the darker decisions, I think, in the history of the country. In the next decade, there were 2 more really close elections, and Congress contemplated that whole time, okay, how would we deal with this if it ever happened again? And while it took a decade, they did come up with the idea of the bill that became the Electoral Count Act. By the way, during that same period of time, they also eliminated the legislative leaders from the line of succession to the presidency. That's another topic that, frankly, I think we ought to think about a little more closely than we have, though probably not today. And those legislative leaders from the 1880s until the Truman presidency were not included in the line of succession to the presidency. They were put back in under President Truman and reversed. Under the early days of the country, it was the President pro tem first and then the Speaker. And partly because of President Truman's great respect for the Speaker Rayburn, they put the Speaker first and then the President pro tem. But there's a long period of time when legislative leaders, because of how many of these really close elections were taken out of the line of succession. The Electoral Count Act of 1887 seemed to do the job, and while it wasn't perfect, as we'll no doubt hear today, it governed our counting process since then. Written at a different age, the language of 1887 is really outdated and vague in so many ways, and so both sides of the aisle want to update this act. Recent polling indicates that almost everybody that's thought about this wants to update this act. Questions like, what's the proper role of Congress? What's the proper role of the Vice President? How should elections, how objections to electors and electoral votes be levied? What's the appropriate threshold for that process to start? What's the role of the federal government in this process? Should the timelines be altered, and more? And we're going to hear about that at the hearing today. It provides us an opportunity. Senator Klobuchar's decision to have this hearing provides us with an opportunity to further explore all of those questions, hopefully come to the right conclusions, and get this bill passed and get it done this year. I want to thank Senator Collins and Senator Manchin for being here today. I applaud their efforts, along with Senator Capito and Senator Warner, who worked on that bipartisan effort to come up with a reform bill Also, I want to thank Chair Klobuchar and Senator King for putting together, along with Senator Durbin, a proposal that I understand the bipartisan group looked into and considered while they were drafting their legislation. The cooperation we've seen here hopefully will be the spirit of cooperation that we move forward, come up with a process that everyone is more comfortable with and will stand the test of time. I want to thank all of you for being here today, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and moving this process forward.
Okay, very good. We've been